Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for watching. Students, thank you for participating in the MVU debate series that the school will be hosting. We're going to be hosting the debate for the candidates for Vermont House, pretty much from the Swanton district. The format for today's debate is going to be me as moderator asking questions of the candidates. I think our session is going to be open enough where if any of the students want to ask any questions of the candidates, please feel free to raise your hand and I will call on you. I want to thank Channel 15 for broadcasting the debate and MVU for hosting the debate. To start off, for opening statements, if each of the candidates could each introduce themselves. We'll start on the far left. Tell us who you are, what your current position is, and why these folks should vote for you. Marianne?
Good morning. My name is Mariana Gamache, and I'm currently representative for the towns of Swanton and Sheldon, which is Franklin 4 district. I was elected to the House 4 years ago, and I'm seeking re-election. So why I want to continue being your representative is because I want to continue to give back to the community. There are many issues that Vermont has to deal with, economic issues, issues with health insurance, and a whole variety. So I intend to continue that path should I be honored to be reelected. And I encourage all of you to go online and you can look at my voting record and form your conclusion if you agree with the positions I've taken or not. So I thank you.
Hi, my name is Nick Brusso. I'm a candidate for state representative for Swanton Sheldon. I'm a Democratic candidate, and I'm running because if you want to see more progressive approaches to how we handle legislation in the legislature, and if you want to see a person in the legislature that will actually work to get things done, I will try my best to do that if I have the honor to be elected on November 6th.
Good morning. I'm Representative Brian Savage, representing Swanton, Sheldon, the Franklin 4 House District. I have completed my 5th term. I'm going into term number 6 if I'm reelected. I'm running on the Republican as well as Democrat ticket, and I have come after serving for 5 terms. I've picked up a great amount of knowledge about the inner workings of state government. I stayed focused on a lot of issues. I'm very big into, and have been in the past, and pushing harder, tougher, stricter laws as it relates to driving under the influence. And with what may be coming on the horizon with legalization of marijuana, that is a serious concern as to driving under the influence. And I certainly would be there to make sure that the public is protected. And as well as the economics of the state, taxation, affordability. Young people such as yourself are leaving the state. We're going to have economic development to provide opportunity for that. Hopefully, you can stay here or come back here if you should leave to go to college, military, trade school, what have you. But certainly come back. There are jobs available now. And quite a surprising number, as I learned last evening, and the employers are having problems filling them, so we have to do something different. So we are on the forefront of trying to do that. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tammy Consaggio. I have not been a politician before, and I hope that makes me an appealing candidate for some. I think we need a change in how we're operating our government right now. I'm concerned that it's become too polarized with Republican versus Democrat, and sometimes we don't get our work done, and it costs us a lot of money. So I'm a mental health counselor by trade and also have a certificate in mediation. So I've done a lot. I've been a college administrator also for almost 20 years and have worked in this high school and others before that. We don't listen enough to each other, and we don't listen enough to younger people. So I'm here as an independent candidate. I also believe in a democracy, that there should be choices for voters. We have 2 seats in the Sheldon-Swanton district. There were 2 candidates and then 3, and finally I said, you know what, I'm jumping in. I want 4 seats. So we're representing 2 towns, Sheldon and Swanton. I'm from Sheldon. Between us, we have the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, and an independent. So we have a lot of choices now.
Okay, so the first question that I'll select from the prepared list that I think all of you had access to is kind of a teacher-based question. As a teacher, we always try to remain neutral with our news sources, and we're presenting facts to the students, and that's part of our job. I think bias comes out every once in a while, but generally speaking, we're supposed to tell both sides. Would you mind sharing with us what are your primary news sources? We'll start here on the right with Tammy.
Well, being an independent, I sometimes vote for Republicans, sometimes Democrats. Sometimes I believe what libertarians believe, that especially don't control my world as long as I'm not affecting other people. Sometimes I agree with progressives. So I watch and listen to a variety of news sources, MSNBC, Fox News, Rush Limbaugh. There's a fun show, Ernie and Charlie, in the Burlington area. I don't know if you've heard of them. And I especially like, though, Vermont Public Radio and National Public Radio. Sometimes I feel like there's a less bias. The BBC is another one from another country. So it's interesting to get a perspective of how do other countries feel about us. So I like to listen to all the opinions, and I want to know, even if I don't agree with you, where your thinking is coming from and why you feel that way. So I try to listen to all of it.
Right.
I have primarily for national and world affairs, I will tune into occasionally one of the networks. I say occasionally, but generally probably 4 out of the 7 nights, be it CBS, NBC. I don't too often do ABC. And I watch news programs such as 60 Minutes. I also do flip on to CNN or Fox News to see what story is being covered. If it's of interest, I'll stay with it. Locally, for state affairs, I have found that one of the online publications to give the best nonpartisan approach on most issues, and I'm not saying that I always agree with their approach, but for the most part it's pretty straightforward. It's called VT Digger, for Vermont Digger. It's online, you can get in, you can also look at back issues, and it gives a pretty good rounded affair. I have actually been a guest on Charlie and Ernie, and it's a fun program to be on. Unfortunately, a few years ago we lost a local radio station in Franklin County, so WVMP, that 620 that Charlie and Ernie are on, is the closest we have to a local radio station. So it's going to be, pretty well-rounded, and I get the opinion. I don't listen to the BBC, but I do, and have for years, tuned into the CBC or the CTV, the Canadian television networks, the CBC, the CTV, and I've actually appeared as another network up there, Global Television out of Montreal, and a few years ago I was a guest on that to talk about the new Highway 35 when it was under construction. So,
Nick?
Get their perspective.
My issues are going to be similar. I'm a really big international news junkie, so I watch the BBC a lot. It's a great resource if you want to find out what's happening around the world. I also, for local news, I do read on VT Digger, Vermont Digger, great nonpartisan source. And for national news, I tend to tune into CNN, which I think is one of the least biased news channels in the national media scene. But I think national media is not the best source to get your news media in the country.
Mariana?
So I listen to talk radio a lot, which would be 6:20 a.m. My source of information when it comes particularly to Vermont issues is the VT, Vermont Digger. I became acquainted with them before I actually ran for my first campaign, and I used to sit in the State House and watch the proceedings, and then I would read the write-up on VT Digger, and for the most part it was fairly exacting, and so that became a really good source for me just to learn about other issues that were being talked about or considered. So that and Charlie and Ernie show in the morning is very informative because frequently they have legislators or people from the administration discussing Vermont issues, and that's the thrust of what what I'm listening to and why. I'm concerned about what happens on the national level, so I do a variety, a variety of listening to different mainstream media to get different views on what is going on. But I'm a Vermont resident, and I'm a Vermont representative, so that is the thrust of where my time goes in terms of the news media. And I will follow up on things that may be happening on the national level that could have a direct impact on our state. And so that's pretty much how I get my news and why.
So as moderator, part of my job is trying to balance the question list between questions which these folks may have an intense interest for your answers and questions which the general viewing audience may be interested in. But I think I'm going to start off with one that may not necessarily affect these guys, but does affect a lot of Vermonters and maybe some of the Vermonters in this age range. And I think it's probably most appropriate that the two sitting state representatives comment first, because you may have a little bit more insight into currently what is law. Could you explain what is Vermont's current laws with respect to marijuana use and how you voted on the most recent material that came before the House?
Okay. Current law is, first of all, marijuana is legal in the state of Vermont for prescription use for a lot of people who are on chemo, and that's been the way for quite a number of years now. If somebody's on chemo or some other condition, a doctor may issue a prescription, and they go to a special dispensary to have that prescription filled for medical use marijuana. And we have recently, in this past session, allowed the cultivation of marijuana for personal use. Now, to get into the, no pun intended, to get into the weeds here a bit, I'd have to have the law in front of me to really understand it, and to correctly quote it. However, you're allowed to grow up to 2 mature plants, have 2 mature plants of your own for your own personal use. You cannot sell that to anyone. If you harvest it, you cannot sell the marijuana to anyone. You also are able to grow, I believe it's 6 other plants, but again, it's all for your personal use within your household. Now, caution, however, and we've decriminalized the use of marijuana, so if you're out smoking a joint, you're apt not to get arrested, and it's not a criminal act, again, assuming that you aren't selling it to somebody. However, if you're out on a boat on Lake Champlain, Lake Champlain comes under the jurisdiction of the Coast Guard, and marijuana is still very much illegal under federal law. And you can be arrested by the Coast Guard for possession and use of marijuana if you're on Lake Champlain. Just keep that in mind. That's pretty much it, I believe. With and it's an ongoing process. There is some move to legalize it further, so that it could be sold on a retail basis, but we'll probably talk about that later. So that's what we've got in place, sort of, right now.
Representative Savage, a follow-up. How did you vote on decriminalizing and allowing the personal growth of marijuana?
I voted against it because, again, it goes back to we still have no readily available source with which to test somebody for being under the influence while driving.
Okay, thank you. Representative Gamache.
It's hard to add anything to what Brian said because he gave a very thorough explanation of where the law stands now. I voted against approving marijuana for recreational use, although I did vote for the extension of medical marijuana. Those are two different issues. The problem is because it's still a Schedule I drug on the federal level, any kind of testing by any research or university or any lab that receives federal funds cannot happen because it's tied into the fact that it's illegal. I think that the federal government needs to do something in terms of finding a way, if not rescheduling it, then to do something in some way so that there can be appropriate testing of it. So all the information we have is anecdotal in terms of the medical use of marijuana. And I serve on the Human Services Committee, so we had a lot of testimony from people who suffer from various maladies, including PTSD. And so it seemed clear that people did seem to be helped by this. So I am very much in favor of certainly the continued research into the medical marijuana, because I think that there are benefits there. As far as recreational marijuana, that's a whole different story. Potency of marijuana is of great issue to the medical community. Marijuana grown today is certainly not the kind of marijuana that was grown in the 60s. It's much more intense unless you are truly growing your own and getting it or growing it organically. There are lots of pesticides and other kinds of toxins that are involved with the growing of the plant. So that from the information that we gleaned from the medical community, this can be quite alarming for anybody who is smoking it, certainly on a regular basis. And as Representative Savage said, there is no testing for the marijuana. And so that's a great drawback. What we also heard from the medical community when we were doing hearings on this is that some people seem to be able to smoke weed occasionally or to a certain extent and not be negatively affected. But then there are other people who, because of what they call addictive personalities, it actually applies the same way to alcohol. Some people can have a drink or two. They can drink socially on a fairly regular basis, more, limitedly, not excessively, and they're perfectly fine. Other people, as soon as they get involved with alcohol become addicted. So there's a chemical addiction, there's also a psychological addiction. And the same appears anecdotally to be consistent in terms of marijuana with that. And so that's a big problem. And I know that the law enforcement community has had great misgivings because, again, there is no way of testing it. And so people tend to think, oh, well, it's only weed. It's harmless. It's not going to do anything to you. That doesn't seem to be quite true. And again, there's no way of yet, except for anecdotal records, there's no way of really finding out what the limits of things are, or why some people are affected and other people are not. So it's of great concern because we don't want to put anyone in harm's way, and so that's pretty well where it stands at the moment. We'll have to see what happens down the road.
Candidate Brussel.
Sure. I support creating a retail market for marijuana so that anybody over the age of 21 can purchase marijuana. I believe that it is coming either way. Canada has legalized marijuana, and so has Massachusetts. I believe that we need to be able to take advantage of the tourism and the tax funds that we can receive from legalized marijuana. When I hear about when people discuss the potency getting worse since the 60s, well, then we should have the government regulate marijuana instead of leaving it in the black market, where basically anybody can access marijuana and can mix marijuana with any drug, like dangerous drugs like heroin or cocaine, where I would rather have people purchasing marijuana in a government-regulated store than purchasing it off the black market. So I believe in creating a legalized. I believe in a retail market for marijuana, and if I was in the legislature, I would vote to support it. I would vote to support it.
Ms. Concejo.
So even though I wasn't the legislator, I paid very close attention to this. I mentioned I'm a mental health counselor and also work closely with medical providers. And I work with folks like you and older folks. I agreed with Reps Savage and Gamache to vote no this time. But that doesn't mean I don't want it next time. I was concerned because there's not a way, like we have for DUIs. I felt like we needed to give the law enforcement community a little bit more time to figure that out. So not to be a lecturer, I've smoked pot when I was 18. It is stronger today, much stronger. It didn't used to be physically addictive. It is now, with what's currently out there. I think we're very hypocritical as a society to say marijuana is bad, but then we have so many people that drink too much. I'd actually rather have someone responsibly and safely say, hey, I'm going to have a joint than to overindulge with alcohol, because what we say is responsible for alcohol. We don't say that. We say have a designated driver. So I think it's about moderation, but let me tell you something that has alarmed me because I've studied this a lot. If you overuse marijuana, in your brain, it literally lowers your IQ. Literally, your IQ, your ability for the rest of your life to have the capacity to use your mind and your brain. But we burn ourselves out on alcohol too, and we all know it. Some of you are seniors. You may be 18 already, maybe you're not, but you can just hop over the border now, or you can drive to Massachusetts, and what you're going to do, not you particularly, but what people can do that want to smoke it legally, is you're going to go across the border, and then there's a risk of driving. while you're high. We know we're supposed to have designated drivers across the border for alcohol, but we don't always have designated drivers. So I'd like to bring it out of the shadows. Yes, I think it should be legalized. I'm concerned about what gets put in marijuana by those who are dangerously in the drug trade, and they're trying to make a buck. So they're putting stuff in the marijuana that's not safe. And how do you know? I also would like to see medical marijuana should have been expanded more. It does work for PTSD. It's been very helpful. But I see people with anxiety who are self-medicating, who are smoking pot. Problem is, depending on what kind of pot you get, sometimes it makes your anxiety worse. So that's where I do like the idea of regulating marijuana so that you know what you're getting. And if you grow it yourself, you sort of know what you're getting and what you're putting on your plant or in your soil. But I don't know about seeds. I don't know enough about if these seeds are better than these seeds or the potency. So I would like to look at it again. I don't think we're done talking about it.
Okay, I want to give the opportunity for any polite or well-worded follow-ups from any of the students if they have any questions. Okay. Moving on to an issue which was an issue certainly 20 years ago when I was in the legislature. It is even more of an issue now. It's farms and the current state of agriculture in Vermont and in Franklin County. What should Vermont government do to help family farms who are struggling with a lot of debt and other issues? Or on the flip side of that, because that industry has been hit so hard, should we let the free market take its course and withdraw some of that public support for farms? So I think we'll start off with candidate Rousseau.
I think we should. We can do a lot of things. We need to. I know the big thing that's causing the crisis with farms right now is the dairy price. So we need a federal delegation to create a new supply management system or a more effective supply management system for Vermont dairy farms. Outside of that, what the legislator can do, I think we can incentivize farmers to be able to sell their milk and whatnot locally. Also remove barriers from that for them to be able to sell their milk and whatnot online. I know that we don't have expanded access to broadband all over the state, and we need to expand it so they can be able to sell their dairy products from all over the world. We also need to. I think our local government can do a better job at providing loans to dairy farmers. So just in case they need a little bit of a hand up, that way they can get some help from our local government.
Ms. Concejo?
I used to live on a farm, a dairy farm. And I know that even if farmers do everything right, sometimes it's a tough way to pay your bills. And it's a way of life. It's not just a business. We can't, in Vermont legislators directly impact the dairy prices for milk, but I think Vermont legislators can still be really advocating for you with our national representatives. I would want to pull people in. My campaign is to build stronger communities together, so I'm somebody that organizes people to speak up and use your voice. So I would want to be working with all of you and others to say, what ideas do you have? I do think that some of the problem, in addition to milk prices, is that the environmental concerns, especially around water quality. But I think we blame farmers for that way too much. So if I wash my car with a certain kind of soap, or I put pesticides on my lawn, or my driveway is paved, which it isn't, but if it was, all of this runs into the streams and eventually to the rivers. So farmers are getting beat up right now, and I don't think it's fair. Should you do what you can? Yes, but I think we need to help pay for these updates that you need to run a farm without contributing to the environmental challenges. And I'm seeing some of that going on around Franklin County right now with the crops you're planting, and I'm seeing signs. I especially saw some in Franklin, close to Lake Carmine, to plant different things, to plant the corn further away from the water, how you contain manure, when you spread manure. So there are things that we can do in Vermont. I like Nick's idea of a loan to help support you in doing what you need to do. And then to say, hey, everybody else, how do we all take care of this problem? I think farmers too, sometimes your family has to pay for their own insurance. And right now, what I'm seeing as a therapist is even if you buy insurance through our current system with Vermont, the deductibles or the copays can be so high that you actually can't go to the doctor or especially come to counseling. So I've had plenty of people that just can't see the counselor because the costs are too high. So if somebody on the farm does not work outside of the farm for benefits, then how do you pay these bills? And I think we also need to work with places like Bordeaux Brothers and Bates Farm, Home and Garden, Vermont Co-op. Say, how can we all work together to try to help us all pay our bills? So I don't have all the answers. What I would want to do is to keep working with everyone from all perspectives to see what we can come up with.
Representative Gamache.
Well, I guess I look at this a little bit differently. I think that part of the reason that we are in the state that we are in terms of the farming community here in Vermont, and not only in Vermont, but throughout the nation, is the government's involvement in trying to set up a system in order to help the farmers. This has resulted in a whole lot of regulation. It has put a damper on the free market system, the way in which it was intended, and it has a whole lot of negative consequences. The federal government oversees all of these programs. So in terms of the state being able to do anything independently, it's really very difficult because the federal government regulations take precedent. And I agree, the farmers for years, the dairy farmers, have been blamed for the condition of the lake, which is, well, the lake has been a problem for years and years and years. Some farmers have not helped the situation. But when I go around and I look and I see the compliance and how hard the farmers are working in order to comply to both the state and the federal regulations, it's quite impressive to see the lengths that they go. And of course, every time there's a regulation, regardless of whether or not it's valid, it costs the farmers money. It always does. And the results that are being produced, I'm told by the farming community, it's really not helpful. So I think a way of being able to deal with these situations is a little less regulation, both on the state and on the federal level. Farmers, they know how to market their products. They know what works best. And sometimes government needs to get out of the way and just let them do what they do best and market the way in which they know it ought to be, their products ought to be marketed, so that they can produce all the products that we need and that we want. It's a very important part of everybody's life. So.
And to finish up, Representative Savage.
Well, it's no secret that the farmers have been struggling in Vermont, especially here in Franklin County, for quite a number of years. There's no simple solution. I mean, we do not, the legislature in the state of Vermont, it's been said, we do not control the price of milk. That's done on the federal level. So we can encourage our federal delegation to be there and to start working on the pricing situation. The other problem we have encountered, and I didn't even know this occurred, but each year the annual meeting of the St. Albans Cooperative Creamery invite the legislators to attend their banquet. It's usually held on a weekend, and it's a big dinner. There's guest speakers. The the congressional delegation oftentimes are there or are represented. And about 4 years ago, I had an eye-opening experience when I found out that this country imports dairy products, milk, from Australia and New Zealand. It's got a very long shelf life now, and so they're competing globally. And this milk is shipped into this country. So I think there's one thing there that needs to stop. I think the farmers in this country should be able to supply the dairy needs of the population. The shelf life is another problem. There are additives that can go into milk that greatly extend the shelf life. It used to be when I was your age, I used to have to go to the store every couple of days to get milk because it was going to age out. And then way back, I remember the milkman coming from a local dairy and with the milk bottles every other day. Those days are gone. But I still have to look at the date on the gallon of milk when I go to the store to make sure that it's going to be good for a week or so. But when I am in Montpelier, I rent an apartment and I stay there for the week. And last year I went to the grocery store to buy some milk to have in the apartment for my roommates and I look and this particular grocery store in Barrie was selling milk with a shelf life of 31 days. And I was amazed that we do have that in Vermont, and sure enough, we kept it. We didn't use much milk, but I tasted it a good month after I'd received it. It tasted fine. So, of course, the longer something is on the market, I mean, that's less business. Now, as far as the environment, the farmers being blamed for something, they were simply 20 or 25 years ago, they were simply following the federal government recommendation what to do with their manure. And they went from spreading it solid to liquefying it. And many farmers with many years of experience in the farm said they didn't have these problems when they were spreading it solid, but they're having the problems in the fact that when it's being spread as a liquid. They simply did what the government told them they had to do. Now, it's a great expense. They can inject it, and that seems to be working with this machine that will inject it. Those machines are very expensive. I worked in the banking business for a long time. I loaned money to dairy farmers. I've loaned, or I've been doing consulting work. I've worked for dairy farmers there. I've done grant applications. I've also done feasibility studies for the USDA, the Rural Development Corporation. The farmers are having a tough time. There are grants and there are programs available to them. I think on the state level we could have some sort of state guaranteed loan program, but a loan is a loan. It's that. I mean, they're eventually going to have to pay that back. We could give them probably lower rates of interest than they could get, but if they're borrowing $200,000 to buy a piece of equipment, say to inject that manure, they may get an interest rate, say, of 2%, but they still have to pay the $200,000 back. And so we've got to get their price, their revenue stream has got to come up. So that's.
So sort of a follow-up question that is not on the sheet, and I guess Ms. Consejo, we'll start with you, related to farming. President Trump made illegal immigration one of the major points of his campaign. It's been one of the policies that has been widely reported on in the press. if the state or federal government knows that a Vermont farm is illegally employing illegal workers, should the state or federal government go after those farms?
No. We don't have enough people that are willing to work on farms. And if we can't find enough people to work on farms, then how do we get the work done? I would prefer that it's a legal way, but the legal way can take a very long time. There's an apple orchard in the islands that seems to have a good handle on having immigrants come legally to help, but we've got to get the work done. And living on a farm, it's hard to find enough help. You already can work such long hours, and it's hard to find people that are willing to do that work. So how does it get done? So would I prefer legally? Absolutely. My husband is from France, and he came here legally. His son is on an 11-year waiting list to come live in the United States. I don't like that, and I don't like it that people are coming here illegally to live here, but he's stuck in France doing it legally. But we can't just take a hard stance either way. We've got to get the work done, and Vermont farms are struggling enough.
Representative Savage?
I agree. It's difficult, certainly, and there is always the better way to do things legally. I think as long as they're on the farm, and if the farmers are truly having a problem being able to get help, then maybe the federal government could do some sort of approach. The real problem, again, lies with the federal government. When Ms. Consejo mentioned about the apple pickers over in the orchards, they got visas, and the crop farmers out in the Southwest, they have visas. The difference is the visa is temporary. It's good for 3 months or 6 months, whatever. Dairy farming, as we know, is a year-round occupation, and there's no visas available for somebody longer than a few months. Congress can fix that, and I don't know why they don't. They could make a 3 or 5 year visa. They can put any limit on there they want, and so that these people would then come to this country legally, and the farmers would be hiring people legally, but they are, again, in action down there, and they could have corrected this problem a long time ago.
Candidate Brussel?
Yes, I support I would support creating a guest program so farmers can get the workers they need from different countries around, mostly in South America. In Central America. I believe that it would be very helpful to our dairy farmers to be able to get that type of support from those workers. I believe overall it's more of a federal issue. I believe overall in creating a legal pathway to immigration and making it easier for immigrants to immigrate to this country. I think that our country's built off immigration. My grandfather came from Quebec, became a doctor, went in the 30s, and I believe that we need to make it easier for people to immigrate here, and I know that since immigration is more of a federal issue, we don't need to actively have our local police track down immigrants. Border Patrol and ICE, can handle those issues. Our local police doesn't have to actively work with to tackle illegal immigration, and I really don't support them doing so.
Representative Gamache?
Well, immigration is a federal issue. It's not a state issue. I lay the blame of the current immigration system failure on both major parties. This is an issue that has come up continually. It doesn't matter who's in office. It doesn't matter which party is the majority in terms of Congress. there seems to be some sort of well, there obviously is a reluctance for whatever reason to resolve this. And we're at a critical point, given what is happening now in terms of people who are heading towards our borders. It's beyond the purview of the state to resolve any of these issues. I do believe, however, that local government should cooperate with federal government. We are a nation of laws, and the more our laws get trashed, the worse we are as a society. So we either are a sovereign nation or we're not. We either adhere to the rules and the laws, and if we don't like them, then they can be changed. We have a system in place, a legal system, to change laws, to repeal laws. That's all within Congress's purview. So it's very frustrating, I think, I find it frustrating to try, because people then get thrown into situations like the farmers, like the help on the farm. Somehow working on a farm it's fallen out of favor. One doesn't do farm work. Let other people do it. That seems to be an attitude. Consequently, we've allowed a situation where we need the workers. I mean, farms don't just operate on themselves, so you do need that manual labor, and it's quite an issue. We have some form of, on some levels, what I'd call a guest worker program through the visa program, but it's not adequate, not at all. And again, we're limited as a state entity as to what we can do when it comes to immigration issues.
I don't want to cut you off. You good? Or?
No, I was going to say we try to work within the framework of the law best we can in terms of the state, and to comply and not to do anything, to be as cooperative as we can. And that's up to the state legislature in terms of the extent of cooperation. It's up to the administration and everyone who's working in the government, in the state government. I mean, in terms of elected officials. So that seems to be the state of affairs right now, which is not looking very positive.
So we've been going for about 40 minutes. We will be wrapping things up with either one more question from me, but I do want to give the students the opportunity to ask a question if they would like to. Seeing none.
Oh, we've got one.
Oh, sorry. Evan, go ahead.
With the current state of affairs on gun laws, how do you feel about the fact that an 18-year-old male is able to be drafted and sent off to war but is unable to buy a gun in his home state?
I don't like it at all. So the gun laws. Well, let me say, in my house I have 3 handguns, 3 shotguns, and a rifle. I don't know how to use them. They're my husband's. But I didn't grow up with a family that had guns, so I'm not an expert on guns, but I want what is fair. If you are an adult at 18, you are an adult. So I don't think it's fair to wait until 21. Would you like me to say more about the gun laws that were passed, or just stick with that? Okay. So there were 3 gun laws that were passed by the legislature and signed by the governor. So I'm just going to check my notes because I forget letters and numbers. S-22 was an extreme risk protection order if you're going to harm to oneself or others. for up to 6 months. I do support that. I've worked with folks that have been suicidal or homicidal, and sometimes just that intensity of the moment can make them unsafe for themselves and others. So I do support S22. For H422, it was the removal of firearms from a person arrested or cited for domestic assault. I support that one as well. I've worked a lot. I've worked with offenders and I've worked with victims. And either way, I think it's safe for offenders and victims if there is a domestic violence situation that weapons, explosives, guns are removed from the home temporarily until they can have their time in court to request it back. S55, I'm on the fence about that one. So, under 21, I don't think that's fair. We're hunters. My husband was a hunter. He gave it up eventually, but he was a hunter. There's a lot of hunting in this county and in this state. And if you take a hunter safety course, you can hunt when you're 16. And younger. So why can't you have a gun if you're deemed a legal adult? So I'm concerned about that one. I do support bump stocks. If a law-abiding citizen has a bump stock, then I can see why they're upset. I would be too, if I had something. But I have to weigh that against safety. But I want to say that just putting gun restrictions is a false sense of security. There are a lot of reasons why we're unsafe. I know you folks had a lockdown last week. I know last year you had a civil, peaceful protest scheduled against the gun laws, which was, you had a snow day, so you couldn't do it. But there was also a peaceful protest against the gun legislation. And we need to listen more to both sides, because we all know that if you want to hurt somebody, you don't just do it with a gun. Somebody's going to find other ways to do it. So do I want school safety? Absolutely, I do. I want all of us to be safe. What you can do for schools, this is on you. The government can yap at you and make all these requirements. The teachers can, the administrators can, your parents can. But the ones that are going to stop violence in schools overall is you. You all. You're the only ones that have control over that, in my opinion, overall.
So, Tammy, I don't want to cut you off too much, but in order to have everybody else, we only have about 15 minutes left. So, if you want to finish up.
So, you need to work on bullying, folks. It's pervasive, and people are suffering a lot and even killing themselves. So, if you help each other have a more civil school, that's going to help.
Representative Savage.
On the gun laws, the three that were passed, the S22 and the 422, I had no problems with those. I did initially, there was no due process in the one where a police officer just come in and seize the weapons if they thought there was a potential for domestic violence. We had quite a discussion, debate on that, and there is due process in there now, so I was okay with that. So that the person whose guns are being taken will be appearing before a judge the following morning, or what have you. But our law has changed. I mean, 25 years ago, I was the police commissioner for the village of Swanton, and I went with the police on numerous domestic violence situations, and the perpetrator, usually the husband, we didn't worry about whether he had a gun or not. He went to jail and sat there until he got arraigned whenever the next court opening was, usually on a Monday morning. These things occurred. And somewhere along the line, the state got away from doing it that way. So I think, I don't have any problem with this. Those two were fine. S55 I voted against. One of the reasons was the having to be 21. I was 15 when I got my first deer with a 30-30 bolt action. Right-handed bolt. I shoot a rifle left-handed, so I got one shot. But I was 15, and you know, and the thought of bringing a gun to school never entered my mind. Although many of my friends did bring us, you know, I went to school here. Many of my friends did bring their guns because they went either duck hunting or deer hunting after school or before school. They were secured in their vehicle, and none of them ever thought of ever bringing one inside. You just didn't think of it. So I think, you know, there was a few other things I didn't. The magazine size was just arbitrarily pulled out of a hat by the Judiciary Committee by people who didn't even know what. In some cases, didn't even know what the magazine was, and that's the truth. So for those reasons, I voted against that. And school safety is everyone's responsibility. If you see something, do something, say something. You know, that's basically a 24-hour-a-day thing that you have to keep your eyes and ears open at all times and be observant around the environment around you, and don't tolerate bullying. If you see somebody bullying another kid, you know, do something about it. Go tell a teacher or administration staff member. Just don't let it happen. So that's what I've got to say so far.
Candidate Brasso.
Yes, this is just a small side, but I wouldn't support drafting 18-year-olds into the military to begin with. I think the draft is an outdated concept. And even if the federal government wanted to implement a draft, they could. I read before that they don't have the adequate enough funds to actually do it. But when it comes to the gun legislation, I support the gun legislation that was recently passed by the legislator. I believe that when it comes to people under 21, I might be wrong about this. It requires people who want to have access to firearms to enter into a hunter safety class. In order to do so, I believe that is a correct way to do it. I think that if you need to pass a class in order to drive, then you should. Then I think it's a fair ask to handle a firearm that that people under the age of 21 take a hunter safety course to be able to do so. When it comes to other stuff like expanded background checks and reducing the magazine size and banning bump stocks, I support that too. I think banning bumps, I don't think there's any reason why we need to have bump stocks which make semi-automatic guns into fully automatic guns. If we already banned fully automatic guns, and we have done so since the 1930s. And I also support reducing the magazine size, because I know during mass shooting incidents, those critical 2 seconds when they change the magazines, it gives a person in the instant ability to stop the mass shooter from stopping the crisis from ending the crisis. So I support the gun legislation, and I think it makes our communities in Vermont safer.
Representative Kamash.
The whole gun issue, well, first let me say, the only gun legislation that I voted against was S55, which was supposed to have to do with school safety, but in the end had absolutely nothing to do with it. These are Second Amendment rights issues, constitutional issues. And I am a very strong Second Amendment advocate. And people can like it or not, but that's my view. My objection to S55 was the fact that there was nothing in the bill. The bill was supposed to include mechanisms for creating safety in the schools. We do need safety in the schools. But this bill addresses none of that. The law. So I voted against it. I made my views known to many people about why I was voting against it. As I say, it comes down to being a Second Amendment issue as well. And I do believe that S55 is going to end up in the courts because I think it does violate Second Amendment rights. But we'll have to see how that goes. Currently, there are background checks. If you want to purchase a firearm, you have to go through background check. I believe it's 78% of gun purchases are subjected to background checks. The issue of violence, that's a societal issue. This didn't happen overnight. It's not only gun violence, it's violence with any kind of weapon, including cars. We have a lot of angry people, a lot of angry young people. We've had breakdowns in our legal system, in our school system, in our home system. It's a breakdown over many years. I mean, the society we live in now is very different from the society that existed 60 years ago. One could say it's better or worse in some respects, and that's true because people are just a reflection of, we have good and bad within ourselves. And was everything in society a panacea 60 years ago? Certainly not. But in terms of the family, we've seen the largest breakdown of the family. And personally, I think that that's what mostly has to do with a lot of the issues that we have today. And it's very sad. And there's no one solution to that. So, yeah, as Representative Savage said, if you see something, report it to somebody you trust, in order to do something about it. Because only you can let those of us who don't know, who are not involved, letting us know, and solutions. You all need to be listened to. And we do our best within that. So.
Okay, to finish up, we've been going for about an hour now. I'm going to turn it over to the candidates for about a minute of closing remarks. Just want to remind everybody to please go out and vote in 2 weeks. And to finish up, closing remarks, why should these folks consider voting for you, or why should their parents consider voting for you? Representative Gamache.
Well, I will refer back to my record, my voting record. When I came into the House 4 years ago, I had no prior experience, and I learned a lot. And there's a lot to learn. Big learning curve. My first committee I was on was Natural Resources and Energy, and so there was a dealing with green energy issues, industrial wind turbines, as well as solar energy. And that was huge. I like to say to people, and I still do, when I first went on that committee, the only thing I knew about electricity was that if I walked into a room and I wanted light, I flipped a switch. So the learning curve for me was huge, as it is with anyone who goes on to that kind of a committee that has absolutely no background. And we did have our own issue here in Swanton with a proposed industrial wind turbine project that was slated for Rocky Ridge in Swanton. And my constituents got in touch with me, and that project didn't happen and is not going to happen. I then went on, that was my first 2 years. And then when I was reelected, I was put on the Human Resources Committee, which actually I have much more of a background for. I was...
So sorry to interrupt, but to make sure we get in the rest of the closing comments, if you want to finish.
I've learned a lot, and I would like to go back to continue the work that I very strongly believe in, because my voice does make a difference, and collectively, our voices do, and that's what our constitutional republic is all about.
Sorry, and thank you.
Sure. If you want a new approach to fresh-faced legislator, I'd be glad to have your support if you want to see a $15 minimum wage, more assistance for state colleges, creating tuition-free state college. If you want to see a legalized retail market for marijuana, vote for me to serve. I'd be honored to serve you, serve Swanton and Sheldon voters and the legislature. I would definitely, instead of saying no, I would take a fresh approach to and work with our governor and the majority party, the Democrats in the state legislature, to get things done for our community.
I would say that my record of service to my constituents while I've been in the legislature kind of speaks for itself. I've always reviewed each piece of legislation carefully and thoroughly. As well as there's another thing that we do in the off when we're not in session, and that's constituent service. And I've represented or have had constituents call me with a lot of concerns over the years about everything from motor vehicles to wetlands to insurance problems, and not just health insurance, but insurance on like homeowners insurance. And I either assist them directly or I point them in the right direction where they need to go. And so I look forward to continuing to provide that service. But I encourage everybody to vote. It's very important.
I don't know if you should vote for me or not. I don't know if you know enough about me. So I have an active Facebook page, Tammy Consejo for State Representative. I would rather have you vote and not vote for me than not vote. We don't listen to younger people enough, and I don't think we listen to our oldest citizens enough. So if I'm elected, I promise you you're going to not like everything I do, because that's not realistic. So I don't make false campaign promises so that you're going to vote for me. If you like somebody that's going to be independent and not do what a party says they have to do, I'm your person. But you're not going to like everything I do. I would be a regular here, I can tell you that, because I've worked with so many high school students and college students, and I know that you feel like you're not heard, politics is boring, politics seems so complicated, and you don't think it relates to your life. So I would want to come back and talk to you, even if you can't vote for me or don't vote for me, and hear what your thoughts are and what's important to you folks, because I'm 56 years old. You know, I'm heading in the other direction. The future is with all of you, and we need to listen to you.
So I'd like to thank all 4 of the candidates for coming to MVU. Thank you for answering our questions, and thank you for taking time out of the campaign to come and visit us. Thank you for broadcasting, cable access. Thank the students for coming and listening, and thank the viewers for watching.